election centre that we've set up in the ABC's headquarters in Sydney. It's currently about 20 to 8 on the east coast. That means polls are going to be closing in about 20 minutes' time in the west. 19% of the vote has been counted, and at this stage there is a 2.6% swing to the ALP. Michael Disco Inferno Rowland is going to take us through that in a little bit more detail.
Yes, I'm going to save my best dance movements until later in the night, Lee. I've been promised a disco ball ahead later on. Now, I can show you the map of Australia. Each triangle represents each of the 150 seats in the House of Representatives. Along with the power of dancing, I have magical powers tonight. If I click my fingers, we can show you where the seats are falling so far. And there you see, based on the seat count, most of the East Coast at least lighting up in coalition blue, red representing the Labor seats, and the seats of Melbourne in Victoria being held by the Greens' Adam Bandt. Lots of chat, as you're just discussing there, about Tasmania. So let's have a breakout of how the seats in Tasmania, the 5 seats in Tasmania, are falling. And there we see the ABC is projecting the Labor Party to have a clean sweep of the 3 Liberal Party held seats, Bass, Browden and Lyons, to add to its existing seat of Franklin, and the Denison stronghold being held by Andrew Wilkie staying there. So the Labor Party certainly doing very well in Tasmania. So let's walk over to the disco floor and drill down into the results, in particular in Tasmania, starting with the seat of Bass, held, as we see there, and by Andrew Nikolic since 2013. He is a former Army officer, although Ross Hart in the Labor Party, it looks as though he is going to win that seat, and win that seat quite convincingly. Let's flick over now to the seat of Braddon, and again another seat won by the Coalition in 2013 by Brett Whiteley. There you see a 5% swing to the Labor Party's Justine Key. On that basis, it's the ABC's prediction that's another Labor Party gain. And let's finish off our look at Tasmania with the seat of Lyons, held by Eric Hutchinson, also since 2013, and there you see a swing of about 3% to the Labor Party candidate, with, as you see, also a very significant number of the votes counted, 57% there. So at this stage, Tasmania, Lee, is certainly turning a shade of red.
Thank you very much, Michael. Let me just go, Annabelle, what have you got for us?
Well, it's time to take a look at Tasmania. It's obviously one of the states where there's a noticeable amount of early movement here, and good news for the ALP. We do have the Liberal member for Lyons standing by, Eric Hutchinson. He's coming to us from a subdued party background there. Eric, welcome to the program. Are you surprised by the amount of movement against the coalition we seem to be seeing in Tasmania? Can you hear me, Eric? I might need to speak up.
I've got 2 voices coming through.
Okay. We'll give him a second just to see if we can get that audio sorted out. I'll tell you what I can do in the meantime, though. Often I know from when I've been sitting at home on election night watching, I'll be flipping around all of the various networks, and I'm here to tell you that you don't need to do that, because I have somebody out the back watching the other networks for us, and so I can tell you all the interesting things that they've got. So, George Brandis on Sky has said that it is very difficult for Jamie Briggs to hold Mayo from here, that they do not believe that he's going to be able to hold that seat, and that it's been lost to the Nick Xenophon party. On Channel 9, Linda Burney has claimed the seat of Barton for the Labor Party. So there you go. You don't need to go anywhere. Just stick with us.
Can I add one that I think will win MacArthur? Congratulations to Mike Freelander and the rest of the campaign. I think we've got a good swing there. And Linda Burney, what a fantastic addition to the federal parliament. Good on you, Linda.
Right, let's have another crack at Tasmania and see if Eric Hutchinson, I can see from his nod that he's actually hearing me and only one of me, which is a great relief, I imagine. Eric Hutchinson, welcome to the broadcast, and it looks to be a different situation from what you might have anticipated in Tasmania tonight.
Annabelle, still very, very close, and certainly in the seat of Lyons, we're still right in this. We've got a number of the northern booths still to be counted, and I think it'll be very, very close. It always was going to be.
You and Andrew Nikolic in Bass and Brett Whiteley in Braddon are known colloquially as the 3 amigos. Were you expecting all 3 of you to be in trouble this evening?
Well, certainly it looks like Braddon and Bass they're doing it a little bit tough at the moment. But so in Lyons, look, as I say, we've still got a number of larger booths in northern Tasmania still to be counted. So, we're certainly not we're not giving up at this stage. It was always going to be very close, and that's how it's proving to be.
We're relying on you in this circumstance, Eric. You're the first Tasmanian we've come to interpret the state for us. So, what was going on there during the campaign? What could explain a movement like what we're seeing at the moment?
Well, there was a lot of very vulnerable people that were frightened by a whole series of lies. There's no question about that, and that seems to have had an impact. But look, as I say, we've got some time to play out here. I got an enormous swing in 2013, a 13.4% swing to win the seat from a 20-year sitting Labor Party member. So it was always going to be difficult. A 1.2% margin, obviously if there's a movement against that, it's going to be tough. But as I say, we've still got a number of larger booths in northern Tasmania to be counted, and we're certainly not giving up at this stage.
So were you hearing, Eric Hutchinson, a lot of feedback on the ground about the Labor Party's campaign on Medicare? Did you hear a lot of stuff about that?
Oh, clearly. I mean, it's been everywhere. I mean, they've been, robo-calling, pensioners at night time and vulnerable Tasmanians, and certainly that seems to have had an impact.
What about any of the coalition issues that Malcolm Turnbull was retailing? Were they catching hold in Tasmania?
Annabelle, look, absolutely Tasmania is in a better place today than it was 3 years ago. There's no question about it. Unemployment is significantly lower. When I was elected in 2013, it was over 8%. Today it's 6.5%. There is a confidence in the state that simply wasn't there 3 years ago. We had Labor Green governments in Canberra, we had Labor Green governments in Hobart, and Tasmania has a renewed sense of optimism. But it does appear that, as I say, the scare campaign that was run by the Labor Party has had a significant impact.
And what do you see happening in other parts of Tasmania? What do you think about the Senate vote? Are you expecting to see a lot of support for minor candidates? There's a general swing across the continent to other candidates.
Anna, we'll just have to wait and see. Look, as I say, I'm focused on the people of Lyons, frankly, and I have been for the last 3 years. And if I'm given the honour of being re-elected, I'll continue to do that.
Right, we'll continue to monitor the situation throughout the evening. Thank you for joining us, Eric Hutchinson, tonight.
Thank you, Annabelle. Cheers.
Anthony, what have you got for us?
The first thing I'll say is we're in for a long night. The picture is still pointing there is a swing against the government, but there's a lot of seats that I still have in doubt. I mean, by this stage of the night, I've got 58 and 56 across the bottom of the screen there. It's just not budging above 60. So I've got enough seats that I'm just not prepared to give away, and that's why it's a bit peculiar. I mean, it looks like the government's on track for a majority, especially because we've still got WA to come in. But at this stage, we're still not calling it, but it's the seats. Some seats are falling, a lot are still in doubt. The swing isn't big enough to change government, but you'd say at this stage of the night the government has its nose in front, and I think that's a strong statement to make. Macarthur is a seat that the Labor Party has gained. Mike Freelander on 54% is a local paediatrician down there. Russell Matheson on 34%. Now, this electorate was pushed around severely by the redistribution. It lost all the best Liberal booths in Camden, moved into the Campbelltown area, and clearly Labor has been able to tap into that traditional Labor vote in that area, which perhaps was disaffected at the last election. We look at the change in first preferences occurring there. Big change in first preference votes, and that's then reflected in the two-party preferred swing. That's one of the biggest swings we're seeing in the country. So I think that is partly to do with the redistribution. I think sometimes when you get this rearrangement of electoral boundaries, you lose. You don't actually get a decent swing figure. You don't get a decent margin out of it. And this looks like one where the Labor vote was underestimated based on the redistribution. Lindsay, on the other hand, 21% counted, 42% for the Liberal Party, 38% for Labor. This is not a seat where the Greens poll well. Marcus Cornish, who's directing preferences, the ex-Liberal member, has only got 2.4%. So he won't get public funding or his deposit back on those values, but he was there as directing preferences to Labor. But at this stage, we look at the change in votes occurring. There is a decline in the first preference vote. There's an increase in the vote for others because there has been a change there. The two-party preferred swing we're seeing is 4.4%. Just surprises me sometimes. It's got the Labor Party ahead. That figure, I don't know what polling places that's from, but at the moment, last time I looked at that figure a few minutes ago, the LNP, the Liberal Party, were ahead. So I think that's just a bit of bouncing around, which is exactly why we haven't given that seat away yet. But the figures are interesting there. Reid, Craig Laundy is well ahead there on Angelo Tsarekis on the first preference votes. The change in first preference, that's the no swing that's occurring there. I was after the change in vote. Very little change on first preferences there, and the two-party preferred, very little change. So that's a Lib retain, and we're relatively confident in those numbers. So that's quite a good result there for Craig Laundy. So you're seeing a lot of variability from seat to seat. As we do with Macquarie, Louise Marcus is well ahead, but this is an electorate where you get a big vote for the Greens. And Louise Marcus has only got 40%. When you're in the low 40s, you're in trouble. The change in first preference vote that's occurring there, the Liberal vote has fallen substantially on first preferences. There are some others on the ballot paper this time. The two-party preferred swing we're seeing is 6.5%. Last time I looked, it was ALP ahead. The figure we got now says ALP gain, but certainly Macquarie is one of those seats well above that swing, but it's another one of those seats which was probably always a possibility. Susan Templeman, the Labor candidate, has run in that seat before. So at this stage, that looks like another gain for the Labor Party, but I'd like to come back and have a look at that one later. I think we can certainly give away Macarthur. I'd want to have a look at Macquarie in more detail. Bert Van Manen, again, there's that figure, 40%, 39 for the Labor Party, 6.3 for the Greens, 5.9 for some independents. There's a smattering of votes for other parties there. Look at the change in vote that's occurring. Not much change in first preference vote. The big change is the disappearance of the Palmer United vote, and that is all going to others and going to the Labor Party. The two-party preferred with swing is 4.6, 50.2 ALP ahead. So that one's still in doubt in Ford. Herbert's been bouncing around, and the vote for the other parties and the change in the composition of the first preference vote has been an issue there. If we look at the change in vote that's occurred, it's a big drop in first preference vote. Palmer United, a huge increase in votes for others, which is One Nation. We're seeing a lot of change in the distribution of preferences in that electorate, and that's producing a swing, which at the moment is 8.6%, and the Labor Party's ahead. We're not giving that seat away. It's at this stage on the count we've got, it's still in doubt. So that's a dramatic result. Now, a few minutes ago, Longman was falling to the Labor Party, and I want to see these figures in more detail. 38% for the LNP, One Nation 9%, 4% there, 4.8 for the Greens. The change in first preference vote, big decline in the LNP vote. I think the Palmer vote has gone directly over to One Nation by the look of it, or sort of transmogrified through other parties. But it's that change in the preference flow is creating a 7.7% swing in the Labor Party's ahead. Now, the one thing I would say about Longman, it's an electorate with several ends. There's a lot of population growth at one end, and I saw a lot of Burpengary figures. I think that's a seat we're coming back to. As I said, we haven't given that away, but there's a lot of counting in that seat. We're seeing, and this can happen, it's just this change in the preference flow has actually created a swing out of nowhere. The drop in first preference vote for Wyatt Roy is one of the problems there, but there's more counting to come in that electorate. But as I said, let me look at my screen updating. The coalition's ahead. The swing is about 2.5%, and the coalition has still got more seats than Labor.
It'd be useful
sorry, Penny.
I was just wondering if we could get where are we at in terms of what Labor wins you've declared to date. So
I can do. I think I have changing seats here somewhere. Seats changing. We're giving the Labor Party.
Braddon, Lyons, Macarthur, Macquarie.
Murray, of course, the national gain from the Liberal Party. Damien Drum, the new member for Murray. Macquarie we've added there, but again, let's
you couldn't be counting Macquarie.
It has passed. And I think I've got some seats in doubt. I've got lots of seats in doubt. In fact, there are all sorts of seats in doubt. So that's why we're not calling the election yet, because there's so many seats still in doubt.
Let's bring Barry in. Barry, how are you reading things?
Yeah, well, I just want to underline the point that Anthony made, that it will be a long night before we know whether or not this government has a working majority. Let me just take you through a possible scenario. 3 seats lost to the government in Tasmania. Already, it seems as if Barton, Patterson, Macarthur, Eden Monero, Gilmore and Macquarie, that's 6, have fallen in New South Wales, and yet we haven't got a clear picture yet on others like Robertson, Lindsay and Reid. But let's say 9. Tasmania, New South Wales, 9. Labor would have good prospects in Solomon and Hindmarsh. That takes you to 11. Keep in mind the magic figure is 15. Nick Xenophon could win 2 seats in South Australia. That takes you to 13. And that's assuming that the government holds all of their seats in Queensland, and that's without Western Australia in the mix. So that gives you a sense that this that the prospect of whether or not the government will have a working majority is one that I don't think we'll know the answer to that for maybe a couple of hours to come.
Scott Morrison?
Well, look, I don't think you can be counting seats like Robertson and Reid and even seats like Macquarie and even Gilmore at this stage. So I don't think people should get ahead of themselves on those sorts of things. I mean, the Tasmanian seats, I mean, you heard Eric say it himself in terms of how these votes still have to fall across a lot of the other branches. They're out there. The result in Macarthur at the moment, that is very disappointing. And there's no other way to put it other than that. And I started the program by talking about the extraordinary work that was done by our 3 Tasmanian members. And if they were to hold those seats, then I can't think of what else they would have done over the last 3 years to do that. And that's why I think Eric has every reason to still be hanging in there, as does his colleagues.
Did we heard the Mike Kelly in Eden Monaro say that they were calling Peter Hendy a unicorn, he hadn't been seen and so forth. Did he not run a very good local campaign?
Oh, look, Eden Monaro is a tight seat. Mike lost it last time. So, you know, and
in the middle of a massive swing.
Mike didn't go to the
press club. Mike didn't go to the press club to watch speeches while other people were out door knocking for him and standing on pre-poll.
Well, Peter was there supporting his Prime Minister. So, look, I think all of our candidates, I think everyone's been out there working very hard over the course of particularly the last 8 weeks, but over the last 3 years. And look, as these results come in, I mean, if you look in places like Victoria and if you look in Queensland, then Labor are just not making the ground in those 2 states that they would need to get to the magic numbers. And then you've got seats like Herbert, where there has been a big shift across to the Hanson vote. Where that goes, and does that come back to the coalition rather than go to the Labor Party after the distribution of preferences? We'll see. But in Queensland, then I'm just not seeing the volatile shift away from the government there. Or when you've got seats in Victoria, again like Chisholm, when we're holding seats like Dunkley and obviously Corangamite and all of that falling still with the government, then I think it continues to put us in a position to be able to form that government.
All right, well, let's go and have a look at one of the rural, or a group of the rural seats, and of course the one that we all know best, the perhaps the most willing contest that we've had throughout the course of this campaign has been the seat of New England, which has pitched Barnaby Joyce against Tony Windsor, who's making a comeback in that seat. So let's begin our regional seats run with that seat of New England, Barnaby Joyce against Tony Windsor.
We've got 28% of the vote counted, and Barnaby Joyce is well ahead. Now, I don't have polling place information from this electorate. We just have to go on the raw numbers here. But at the moment, 28% counted, 50% for Barnaby Joyce. I would presume that we haven't got a lot of Tamworth and Armidale boos at this stage, but still, he's far enough ahead on first preference. That's a preference count that we've got there. Look, I think that looks like a national retain, but you must remember Tony Windsor did have more support at one end of the electorate than the other because he used to represent the state seat of Tamworth. At this stage, we're giving it to Barnaby Joyce. That's probably a correct prediction, but I'm always much more cautious. So I think it looks like Barnaby Joyce is back. Yeah.
That's what we're hearing.
Yep. The seat of Murray Sharman-Stone's retiring. Duncan McKechnie is the new Liberal candidate, and Damien Drum is an MLC in the State Parliament, or has been, and a former Fremantle AFL coach. It's a big lead for him at the moment. The Labor Party preferences were directed towards the Liberal Party, but from my experience of Victorian electorates, the Labor Party doesn't usually produce a good flow of preferences. At this stage, what we're seeing is a 58% vote for the National Party, and that's based on a preference count.
All right, now on to the seat of Page, and there were some hopes for the Labor Party. How are things working out in Page?
At this stage, this looks like a good result for the National Party. We've got a good preference count in many polling, I think about over 50 polling places. And the swing at this stage is, let's look at the preference percentages there. The Greens got 12%, Janelle Saffin 35%. The National vote's 42.7%. We're predicting where this information is from, and the National Party's just ahead. All right, it's saying National Party retained. The one thing that's suddenly starting to prick in my mind is the pre-poll vote, and that will come in later. Is the polling place votes at this election a little bit unrepresentative of what we'll see at the end of the night? We factor in to try and correct that, but it doesn't always happen. Cathy McGowan.
That's right, the seat of Indi. We're now down in Victoria. Cathy McGowan up against Sophie Mirabella.
And I'll do this one slowly because there's a difference between the first preferences and the swing figures here. And what we're seeing in Indi is on first preferences, Kath McGowan there, she's ahead 6,000 and something to 5,900. The percentages, that doesn't look like a good percentage vote there at 34.9. We actually have a preference count in many, many booths in this polling place for the independent versus the Liberal. And factoring in where the votes are from, it's looking like a 4.4% swing to Kath McGowan. I would expect her first preference vote to increase when we get the larger towns in where she polled well last time. So it looks like Cathy McGowan's been re-elected in Indi at this stage.
All right, back into New South Wales now. We go to the seat of Cowper, and the interest here, of course, was that Rob Oakeshott was also making a comeback up against Luke Hartsucker.
Luke's doing very strongly there.
I've just had to alter the figures in this electorate, and we'll do this one slowly. On the first preferences there, Luke Hartsucker's on 45%, Rob Oakeshott 25%, and the Labor Party's just under 15%, the Greens just under 8%. I've factored in 85% of Labor and Green preferences to Rob Oakeshott. There's an 8% swing, but at this stage, I suspect he's... I'm not sure he's 55, it might be more towards 53, but on the numbers we've got so far, he should still just be ahead. I don't think... his first preference vote's about 45%, Luke Hartsucker, and that's probably enough for him to hang on because there'll be a leakage of preferences.
That's the territory we really wanted to see Luke to get into. That has been a difficult seat for us over the last few weeks, and we put a lot of effort into that, and so that's a very pleasing result for the Nationals with Luke.
And let's go back to something that Anthony said just a little bit earlier, because of course 2.5 million Australians have already voted. Now we're expecting those votes will be counted late in the evening, and they'll come in as basically one huge booth, and that has the potential, Anthony, to switch some of these things.
The question for me is it's never usually been a problem. Pre-polls are usually representative of the whole country. I did a by-election in South Australia 2 years ago in Fisher, and it looked like Labor was home and hose on the night, and then the pre-polls were counted, which was a huge number, and we got a really significant change in vote towards the Liberal Party. So that's all I'm saying is with such a huge increase in pre-poll voting, are what's left in the polling places a different representative sample of the voters compared to last time? At the moment, I think, as I said, this is an election where we're going to be here all night because the numbers just aren't gelling into a clear majority. It looks like the government's back, but there's enough doubt in my mind to say, no, let's just hold on that.
Okay, let's pull Barry Cassidy in now. Barry.
Lee, I'm noticing a really interesting trend here that the government is holding ground in Victoria and Queensland. Right. Why? There are Labor state governments in Victoria and Queensland, and they're losing badly in New South Wales and Tasmania, where there are Liberal governments. So it shows you that there's a crossover. The influence of state issues is clearly there. The last time it was this pronounced was in 1993. Now keep in mind they have a Liberal government in WA. So if that trend was to continue, and we've already seen in the polls that there are swings on in Western Australia in some seats of up to 9%, then that's why we might be waiting for figures from Western Australia before we can be really clear as to whether or not the government will have a working majority.
All right. Well, polls have just closed over there. It's just gone 8 o'clock. We're going to have a look at a moment at the seat of Solomon in the Northern Territory. It's a marginal country Liberal seat held by 1.4% by Natasha Griggs, who's held it since winning it at the 2010 election. She is standing by, and we will talk to her very shortly. Chris, give us some more detail about that seat.
Yeah, the seat of Solomon. And one of the problems that Natasha Griggs has had here, of course, is that she's had to put up with the country Liberal Party organisation in Queensland, which is quite dysfunctional and has had some spectacular problems recently. Anthony.
Yes, at this stage on first preferences, we haven't got a lot of count. It's 4 of the 28 polling places. It's one of the smaller electorates in the country in terms of both population. The Labor Party's ahead on first preferences, and I would expect if they maintain that lead, they should go on to win the electorate. We're seeing a 12.3% swing. I haven't seen exactly where that polling places are from, and they are my estimates of preferences, not an actual count. But with such a narrow margin and with so much background noise going on from the problems of the Territory government, which faces re-election in less than 2 months, that's an encouraging first figure for the Labor Party candidate Luke Gosling and would trouble Natasha Griggs.
Speaking of whom, we do have a line up to Natasha Griggs now waiting for us in Marlow Lagoon. Well, not in Marlow Lagoon, at Marlow Lagoon, in the very interesting to everybody seat of Solomon. Welcome to the broadcast, Natasha. You've had a lot of attention from your leader, as has the seat had a lot of attention from Labor as well. You knew this was going to be a tricky electorate for you this time round, right?
Absolutely. The seat's never been held 3 times in a row, and it is a marginal seat, and some are saying it's a bellwether seat. So we always knew that it was going to be tight and that we were in for the fight of our lives, and we're fighters. So we're waiting. We're not giving up. So we know that it's going to go down to the line and or down to the wire, and that's what we've always expected. We've never taken this seat for granted.
Natasha Griggs, you're on a 1.4% margin there for the CLP. Our system at this stage, and obviously not everything's counted yet, not even close, is showing something like a 12.3% swing. Does that sound possible to you?
Well, as you said, there was there's only a few booths counted, and they're some of the smaller booths. So I think it's going to be a long night, and please don't write me off yet, because it's going to be a fight to the death.
31% of the vote counted does look like there is a significant movement of some kind against you. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the issues that you thought really caught hold in this campaign in your electorate.
It's been solid for about the last hour.
Well, we had the unions here actively campaigning for the Labor Party. We had the Mediscare campaign, which was sort of a right across the country, but people really do want to. They were responding really well to Malcolm Turnbull and our economic plan. Unfortunately, there was some other issues around the territory government that certainly has contributed to this. There is no doubt that this has contributed, and I was just saying, and I wanted people to just put their faith in me as part of Malcolm Turnbull's team.
You reissued your how to vote cards at the last minute to send preferences to the Rise Up Australia party. What did you do that for?
Well, I didn't do that. I mean, that's the party makes those decisions. It's not something that I, as a candidate, makes those. If I was going to make those decisions, I'd be an independent. I'm not. I'm part of the Country Liberals.
But this stuff goes out in your name, so you must know what's going on.
Well, it's the party makes those decisions, and for whatever reason, that's what they've decided to do. I mean, we had just the same as in Warringah, just about all the candidates were preferencing against me as the incumbent, just as they were doing with Tony Abbott.
We were just talking about the context of state and territory issues, and Barry Cassidy was making the point that swings seem to be happening against the coalition in places where there's a coalition government and vice versa. It's always a pretty active backdrop to be represented in front of when you're talking about the Northern Territory government. How have those sort of recent shenanigans affected your ability to campaign for a federal seat?
Well, I actually have said that there has been a lot of shenanigans, and I just asked the people of Darwin and Palmerston to mark me on my record. They know that I haven't been involved in those things. They know that I've been a very hard-working member for the people of Darwin and Palmerston over the past 6 years. I won the seat in 2010 when we were in a hung parliament. The seat traditionally goes with the government, and so I'm hopeful that we'll follow that trend tonight.
Tell me, what do the Northern Territory voters think about Malcolm Turnbull as opposed to Tony Abbott? You had a lot of campaign attention from Malcolm Turnbull. He presented you with an $8 million international netball stadium, which must have been pleasant.
Well, look, there, like in every seat, there are people that are fans of Malcolm, and there are those that are not. I mean, I'm fortunate that I've been able to work with both Prime Ministers. I have an excellent relationship with both of them, and I think that as a marginal seat holder, that's what you should do. You should get in there and fight for every dollar and every little bit of infrastructure for your electorate. That's what the people elect you for.
Natasha Griggs, just over a third of the vote counted and significant swings against you, but you're not admitting defeat just yet. Looks like you've got a lengthy night ahead of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You are watching the ABC. This is a picture from outside the election centre. You can see not everyone's sitting at home and watching the election. Some people are still out and about. The time is 8:10 in the east. Polls have just closed in the west. About a third of the vote has been counted, and at this stage we are calculating a 2.7% swing nationally to the Labor Party, but we are not in a position yet to call any result at this time. Here's Michael Rowland to give you a few more details.
Yes, good evening again, Lee. Here I am on the shiny disco floor, so shiny I've had to shine my shoes because they were looking a bit grubby. Here is the seat count, and as you can all see, it is so close tonight. 57 votes to the Coalition, 58 to the Labor Party, 1 held by the Greens and 4 on the crossbench. Now, as the night goes on, we'll pick out individual states and territories to have a closer look at some of the key seats there. Let's focus now on Victoria, and in particular one seat that has been looked at from around the country, and that is, of course, the seat of Batman, held by Labor frontbencher David Feeney. We all know David Feeney has had a pretty ordinary campaign, and you can see that reflected in the good performance of Greens candidate Alex Batol, hoping to make it a 5th time lucky. She has contested this seat 4 times in the past, a swing to her of 11.6%. A very interesting move in the seat of Chisholm. This was a former Labor seat. It has been vacated by the former Speaker of the House, Anna Burke, and there we see a swing towards the Liberal candidate Julia Banks of 2.8%. You may recall, those who watched the Prime Minister's final press club address, that Julia Banks was one of the 2 Liberal Party candidates Malcolm Turnbull called out as likely prospects to win Labor seats in his final speech on Thursday. So the Liberal Party is ahead. We're not calling it for the Liberal Party at this stage, but it just goes to show the power of incumbency. It appears as though Anna Burke has taken a fair bit of her personal vote with her. And let's finish our wrap of Victorian seats with the seat of Corangamite, centred on the beautiful Great Ocean Road, parts of Geelong as well. The ABC is calling that for the current Liberal member Sarah Henderson, a former ABC staffer. She has held that seat since 2013 after taking it off the Labor Party, easily vanquishing her Labor Party opponent Libby Coker. So let's leave that seat run there. We'll be focusing on other seats as the night goes on, other states. Let's cross the shiny disco floor here to bring up our virtual House of Representatives chamber, and how close it is you can see reflected with the flick of the fingers by how many seats are being won by both sides, and it is pretty much even Stevens there. You see 57, 57, 57 Coalition, 57 Labor, and some movement there on the crossbench, 1 Green and 4 independent candidates. As Anthony Green was saying, it could be a very long night ahead of us, Lee.
Thanks very much, Michael, for that. There's a few little tidbits I can throw into the mix. There's been a 4% swing against Tony Abbott in Warringah, but he does look safe. That's with about a third of the vote counted. The New South Wales Labor boss has tweeted that they are claiming Greenway for Michelle Rowland. Scott, are you guys conceding Mayo that Jamie Briggs has lost there?
I certainly wouldn't be doing that. I mean, Jamie would be the one to be doing that if he was even to be contemplating that. And look, at 9 o'clock tonight, all of the pre-poll votes start getting counted. And so what we're seeing is what's been counted today, and we had a massive pre-poll at this election. And so we will start to see that dribbling in after about 9 o'clock our time.
There are some reports too, Scott Morrison, that Peter Dutton might be in a bit of trouble in Dixon. Is that a seat that you're worried about?
No, look, no, it's not. And that's also not showing up on any of the figures that you have here either at the ABC. So, I mean, it's with the sort of sporadic nature of the way some of these numbers splash about early. I mean, Dixon has always been a marginal seat, and so you're going to see as different parts of that seat come in, you'll see that bounce about a bit. But no, there's nothing to suggest at this stage that would be an issue.
Anthony, give us a bit of analysis on the sort of swings that we're seeing happening.
Around the country, well, let's try and do it here if I can remember how to do it. Swings. If we look at New South Wales, we're seeing a swing of 3.2% towards Labor. Let's add Victoria to that, and we're seeing a swing of 1.4% to Labor. If we add Queensland, we're seeing a swing of 2.4% there, but the swing's been quite variable from area to area, and the big difference there is the change in first preference vote. Now, Tasmania was the one we were surprised by. It's an 8.7% swing. That's way larger. I think the polls are showing 3.5 to 4, not 8.7. So that's been a substantial change. I could add one more state to that, South Australia, which are about to do a seat run of the Xenophon teams. It's a 2% swing to Labor, but it's not the relevance of the two-party swing in South Australia, and we'll come on to that in a moment.
Barry Cassidy, how do you account for the huge swing in Tasmania, well beyond what we're seeing in any of the other states so far?
Well, I think it has a bit to do with the fact that there's a Liberal government in Tasmania, and we're getting that trend right around the country. But I think based on what we're seeing now, and the big mistake that I think we made early on, and I made it, is assuming there'd be no gains for the Labor Party in Queensland. That's certainly no longer the case. Labor is now saying that they're very confident they're going to pick up Petrie and Ford. They think they're 50-50 in Longman and Dixon. Dixon is very much in play, and they haven't given up on Herbert and Dawson. Now that there's a potential for the Labor Party to win seats in Queensland, 6 at least in New South Wales, 3 in Tasmania, Solomon they're claiming, Mayo falls to Xenophon, and you've got Western Australia to come up. At this stage of the night, it's more likely than not now that the country will have a hung parliament.
Scott Morrison.
Oh, well, look, I think people are getting a bit excited, frankly. As I say, there's a long night to go with a lot of these counts still to be had. We're at about a third of the vote on most of the seats they're in. You've got the biggest pre-poll we've ever had, and that's still got to be counted from 9 o'clock onwards. And take seats like Gilmore, for example. And information I have from Gilmore is we were performing very strongly on pre-poll in Gilmore. And then you add to that the postal votes and all the rest of it. Now, we always knew this election was going to be very tight, and we expected there to be a swing against the government. Now, what matters is whether those swings in those seats that make the difference are going to be strong enough to see enough of them fall. Now, at this point of the night, I don't see that occurring.
You've campaigned on stable government and delivering stable government. What sort of a buffer do you think you need in the parliament to be able to deliver on that promise?
Oh, look, a win's a win, Lee. A majority government is a majority government. And a majority government and the ability to put your budget into the House and have it passed and to have the authority in the House is what is necessary. And that's certainly what I very much believe we'll be able to achieve tonight. I mean, yes, there is a swing against the government, but I think there is still a very long way to go with a lot of these seats, and they'll come down to very tight races. And I would be thinking that in the majority of cases where we need it to be the case, that we'll be able to form that government.
Penny, are you cautious like Scott, or are you more in the Barry terrain where you think it's a possible hung parliament?
I certainly think there are enough seats which have either fallen to the Labor Party or where Labor is well in the contest or ahead that puts that possibility out there. Absolutely. We've done the Tasmanian branch has done a great job. We've seen us doing well in New South Wales. There's an inconsistent swing in Queensland, which is probably not unexpected, but there's a few seats there. Like at this stage, Ford, we've got a swing on there, which I think as well as the seats that Anthony just went through. So, it is early in the night, and things could change, as more of the vote is counted. But
What's your
certainly there are
theory
more
about
seats
Tasmania,
in play.
Penny?
Health and education. I mean, they are. Every time I've been to Tasmania, every time you talk to one of your Tassie senators or MPs, health and education is front and centre, and I think our campaign priorities there resonated with people. That would be my observation. Absolutely.
All right, well, look, we're going to go to South Australia now and do a seat run through the Xenophon seats, or the ones that Nick Xenophon's candidates were threatening. We're starting in the Adelaide Hills in Mayo, and that was always the one that was most likely to fall, Anthony?
I apologise, I was confused where I was getting them from. I'm getting from the full screen graphics. Jamie Briggs up against Rebecca Sharkey from the Nick Xenophon team, and we have a preference count in this electorate between the two. We've got 33.4% counted, and at this stage Jamie Briggs' vote is too low to win at that level. If he's under 40%, he really can't win. He's only 2% ahead of Nick Xenophon's team, and the count we're getting at the moment is suggesting that the Nick Xenophon team will win Mayo, and that will put another crossbencher into the lower house of Parliament. So we've got a lot more counting to come in that electorate, and again, we don't have this polling place comparison, but the low Liberal vote tells you that they're in deep trouble there.
OK, let's move on to the seat of Grey, which takes up most of that state, includes Port Pirie, Port Augusta. Whyalla, of course, has had its problems there. How's the vote going?
Now, we'll go through these, and we'll go through the two-party preferred we're getting, and I'll explain what's going on here. The Liberal Party vote there, the percentage is on 45.3, so it's fallen under 50. Nick Xenophon is second. At the moment, we're getting a preference count between Liberal and Labor, I'll now go in and start to remove that. So that two-party preferred figure there is not very meaningful. It's the Nick Xenophon team candidate that's finished second. We do not have a preference count on those numbers. So again, that prediction there is not very reliable. We'll just skip through that. We'll go through that. I don't think that's reliable. It really comes down to a different count at this stage. I've got to go in and I've got to turn off and reject the Electoral Commission's
Sure, but
count.
Rowan's above 45%.
He's above 45%.
He's above 45%, where he, at the very least, he would need to be.
Yeah.
And look, Grey was a seat that there'd been some polling on published during the course of the campaign, and it said there was a bit of an issue there, but I think Rowan's still looking very strong.
Probably right.
All right, well,
you would be aware.
I don't know that they've got polling in from, the results in from the key centres, Whyalla, Port Augusta, Port Pirie, which you would think would not favour the Liberal Party.
That would be my caveat to Scott's comment as well.
Let's move on to the seat of Barker, which runs from Mount Gambier to Riverland and the Barossa Valley.
We're seeing a similar situation in this electorate, though the Liberal vote is higher. Again, the Nick Xenophon team finishing second in this electorate, but Tony Passon's vote is above 50%. In that case, he will not have difficulty holding that seat. He's just got to keep his vote at that level. Again, this is a very diverse electorate. It runs all the way from Mount Gambier to the Barossa Valley and the Riverland. So there's a lot of areas. You've got to cover a lot of areas, that electorate, as a member. It looks like Tony Passon should be back. But again, let's see all the count coming in that electorate. And at this stage, that count there, that prediction is based upon having the Nick Xenophon candidate finishing third, and that's a preference count the wrong way.
Okay, to the seat of Sturt, which is held by the Industry Minister and Leader of the Government in the House, Christopher Pyne.
Yes, this is traditionally one of the marginal seats, and at this stage, look at that, 8144 5192, 39.9%. That's a low first preference vote for Christopher. But the Nick Xenophon preferences, while it's producing a swing, they're not flowing solidly one way or the other. They had an open ticket. So when you're on 40% and the third place candidate is running an open ticket, you don't have any problems. So I think Christopher will go on to win that on the preference counts we've got.
You will. Often, I mean, in these seats, when it is flowing that way, it'll be the strength of the candidate's name ID and how well they're known in the electorate and things like that, which will drive those preference flows. So, I mean, Christopher is
very well known local member.
He is a force.
He has probably knocked on every single door.
He has, and called them and done it twice, and he is he's indefatigable and.
This is a man who has a panic attack every election that he's going to lose his seat, right? So it's quite...
He never takes anything for granted.
Melbourne Ports.
Go on.
I've tossed in Melbourne Ports.
Which wasn't in South Australia, which took me a little bit by surprise. When I saw Melbourne Ports, I thought there must have been an error.
I've tossed this in for a specific reason. Look at the first preferences here, and you'll see what's interesting to watch. The Green is in second place. Now, on the figures I was looking at earlier, Michael Danby's vote was down about 7% and the Green vote was up 2%, in which case the Greens will finish in second place in that electorate. Now, the preference count there is we've got is Liberal versus Labor, but if the Greens are into second place, the question is, what has Michael Danby done with his preferences? And the other thing that...
We know. We know.
What has he done?
Well, he had how to votes preferencing the Liberals above the Greens.
Well, I mean, that's...
In defiance of the Central Command's order.
So the interesting thing in Melbourne Ports, if Michael Danby does slip into third place, we will not know the result in that electorate tonight. And potentially... there will be great fun in the Labor Party if Michael Danby's preferences deliver Melbourne Ports to the Liberal Party. That will be very interesting to watch afterwards. And one other thing I'll just say...
It's fair to say Michael Danby would prefer that outcome to the Greens.
The rest of his party might not.
We would like to hold the seat, actually. That would be the first priority.
A good starting point, usually.
We will be coming back to Melbourne Ports through the evening, and I'll say one other thing, given your cross coming up.
Yes.
At the moment, the model we've got predicting is the coalition winning 78 seats. I'm not using that as a prediction. That's my current figure. That's if all seats as they currently are fall the way they are. If they lose any seats in WA, that number starts to come down, and we're waiting to get WA figures.
All right, so we are still not calling it. On that note, let me cross to Julie Bishop, the Foreign Minister and Deputy Liberal Leader, very high-profile Western Australian MP. Julie Bishop, thank you very much for making time to speak to us this evening. There's some suggestion from Barry Cassidy and from Anthony that perhaps we might be heading into hung parliament terrain. What's your assessment as you're looking at the numbers coming in from the east?
I mean, good to be with you. We have run a very hard campaign. It's been a very long campaign, and federal elections are always close. We've said that from the outset. There hasn't been a majority government in Australia since 2004, and so we always knew this would be close. in Western Australia we currently hold 12 of the 15 seats, and now there's that extra seat of Burt. I'm feeling quietly confident that we can hold all our seats, but the seat of Burt is clearly in play, and it's too early to say, of course. The polls have only just closed here in Western Australia, but as I've been travelling around the electorates, particularly in Burt and Cowan, I haven't sensed a mood for change, and so I'm hoping that we will be able to retain our 12 and pick up a 13th in Burt, but that would be a big call, and I'm not making it yet.
Do you think that the 8-week campaign was a mistake?
Lee, we won't know until we know the results, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of people poring over those results and what happened throughout the campaign. But we know why we called the campaign when we did. It was a double dissolution election. We couldn't get important legislation through the Senate, and the Constitution provides a mechanism to break that deadlock, and we've used it. Now, the campaign has been long, but it's also given us plenty of opportunity to explain to the Australian people our economic plan, our positive economic plan for the future. And Malcolm Turnbull does have a long-term view of the future of this country. And we hope that we spent the time wisely and productively, but time will tell.
You say that elections are always close, but when you look back 3 years ago at the utter internal disarray within the Labor Party and the very solid trouncing they were given by voters, you know, how is it possible that just 3 years later here we are in a close election?
Lee, there's no doubt that the public turned on the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government, and the 2013 result was extraordinary. It was a complete rebuff of the years of chaos and disunity within Labor. And now I think we've returned to the normal situation with federal elections, which are generally very close. Unlike state elections, federal elections tend to be close. I think 2013 was an utter rebuff of the chaos of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years, and now we've returned to a more normal pattern. But we've said from the outset we expected it to be close.
Julie Bishop, this is Annabelle Crabb. Our home state of South Australia at this stage seems to be mounting quite a rebellion against the coalition. There's about a 10% swing against, 5% nearly swing against the ALP too. It's all going towards Nick Xenophon. It looks like your former front bench colleague, Jamie Briggs, whose seat's been given away by our system to the Nick Xenophon team, is one of the early victims of that movement. What's your understanding of what's going on in that state?
Annabelle, it's still too early to say, and it's certainly too early to say about Mayo and Jamie Briggs, and I do hope that he holds that seat. But I think in South Australia there is a phenomenon called the Nick Xenophon team, and people are turning to it. I don't understand it. I seriously don't, because Nick of himself can't deliver anything. He can't deliver a budget, he can't deliver debt relief, he can't provide any policies that will be implemented. So I guess it's a protest vote, but I'll leave that to the South Australians to ponder over in more detail. What I can say is here in the West there's been a very strong support for the Liberal Party, and I don't expect to see a third party have the same impact in the West as perhaps the Xenophon Party is in South Australia. The other thing that will be interesting is Nick Xenophon as a brand, as a single candidate, can control his message, can control the way he portrays himself. But if there are more of his team elected, then I think you'll see, like the Palmer United Party, it's no longer about one person, it's about all these other people who are putting forward their views as part of the Xenophon Party, and it's not quite as attractive.
Foreign Minister, it's Lee again. You were saying in terms of the people who are voting for Xenophon that you don't understand it because, you know, he's not able to offer solutions necessarily, but isn't the message that they're flocking to him because they don't like what either major party is offering? Isn't the issue here that Labor and Liberal need to look at themselves and what they're offering and why voters don't like it?
Oh, Lee, there'll be plenty of analysis of this election by both sides and by experts. I have no doubt about that. My point is this, that Nick Xenophon doesn't offer a coherent policy on anything. He's against free trade agreements. Well, South Australia is the state that will benefit enormously from the free trade agreements the Coalition have signed. He's all over the place on the submarine contracts, but South Australia will benefit from those policies of the Coalition. That was the point I was making. Many people will analyse the result in South Australia for a long time to come. It's too early for me to start doing that, I think.
Julie Bishop, do you think that the Medicare campaign mounted by Labor has been a decisive factor in these results that we're seeing come in so far?
Oh, Lee, undoubtedly. I had people in strong Liberal booths in my electorate saying to me they were scared stiff about the Medicare issue because Mr Shorten keeps telling them that we're going to privatise Medicare, and he wouldn't keep saying that if it were a lie, would he? And they're looking for reassurance. Well, as I'm saying, of course we won't privatise Medicare, then the Labor Party have a plane flying around Perth with a banner saying, "Save Medicare, vote Labor." And the number of people who raised it with me in polling booths saying, "I'm really worried about Medicare. I won't be able to afford health care if we don't have Medicare." And I said, it's a lie, it's a deceit. And yet Labor have been boasting about the number of people they've deceived with this monstrous lie at the heart of their campaign. Now that will be an interesting analysis for a lot of people. Labor concocted a lie, they ran with it, they weren't ever stopped by anyone within the Labor Party. Bill Shorten encouraged it, they had Bob Hawke ruled out to promote the lie, and it was only because they had nothing to offer the Australian people. Even today, people were talking about not being able to afford their health care because we were going to get rid of Medicare. It was utter rubbish. But what do you do when one party relies on a monstrous lie to get elected?
Well, Julie Bishop, we will watch with interest those results in Burt when they come in that you've pointed us to. Thanks for making time to speak to us this evening.
Thank you, my pleasure, Lee.
Scott Morrison, how influential do you think that the Medicare campaign was in New South Wales? Well, Julie Bishop was just saying people were coming up to her and talking about it. Did you have that same experience?
Well, I don't know what's more audacious, the size of the lie that was told or the boast that has been made on the back of it about how it's been able to fool people and trick people. I remember in the last week or so of their campaign, Labor strategists were briefing and saying how clever they'd been and that they were putting themselves back in the race because they've been able to put this big trick on. Now, I think it's a pretty disappointing part of our polity where in order to get elected, you just roll out the biggest possible lie you can and ring people up in the middle of the night and frighten them into voting for you.
Penny Wong?
Well, I know that the Liberal Party always want to blame other people for the outcomes, but I would say this. I think regardless of the result tonight, there will have to be a lot of soul-searching in the Liberal Party about their agenda. It is clear, as much as they might like to deflect this discussion, it's clear that people have not responded well to Malcolm Turnbull and his message, his agenda, his policies, you know, the $50 billion tax cut. We still don't know what the result will be. It's clear that they are losing seats at this point, and I think whatever they might like to distract with in terms of the discussion earlier, the reality is Australians have not responded well to the jobs and growth mantra, which was essentially there was really one policy, really only one policy. It's a $50 billion tax cut. That's the centrepiece.
Scott, you say that this is a big, scare campaign and there's no basis to the to this proposition that the coalition is going to privatise Medicare and so on. The fact that people are, to some extent bought this message, isn't that in part attributable to the lessons that they learned after the 2013 election when Tony Abbott ruled out any cuts to health and education and went on to break those undertakings in the 2014 budget?
Well, no, I'm not going to justify the Labor Party selling a big lie at the campaign.
Neither am I. I'm just saying that if, as Julie Bishop says, people were absolutely swayed by it, isn't that because they've learnt over some time to be suspicious when you rule out things like cuts to health and education?
We know they told the lie, they got exposed on the lie, yet they continued to back it in with the phone calls and with the mail and with the little cards and the whispers at the booths and all of these sorts of things. And this was the Labor Party's campaign. It wasn't a campaign about grow the economy, it was a campaign about fright. And,
you're damaging Medicare.
And they're running a fright night.
How is that a fright campaign?
Because there's no basis to it,
the
Penny.
fright is what you're doing to Medicare, Scott.
But we're not doing anything to Medicare, Penny.
Even the doctors say that.
Lee herself exposed your leader as saying we were going to privatise Medicare, and he couldn't repeat it on her program.
You're introducing
so it was a big tactic.
You're increasing the cost of medicine.
Tonight.
And you're removing the bulk billing incentive, which will lead to high costs for X-ray X-rays and pathology and blood tests and
No,
so
there'll
forth.
be lower subsidies to large companies.
Whatever.
Let's park. Can we park our disagreement for a moment?
Okay,
on
we're
Medicare?
parking.
Park it.
Take it for another spin later, I guess.
We'll get it run around.
Keep the engines idling, thank you. What I'm going to do is instead go to Greg Jennett, who is at Malcolm Turnbull's campaign event tonight. Greg.
Yes, Lee, we're starting to get a few Liberal Party members filling in here now. I can't quite describe the mood in any accurate way to you. It's neither buoyant nor pessimistic, but I do want to recount just something. A word was put in my head earlier in the evening. I asked someone here from the Liberal Party what they thought the day had gone like for them, and it said New South Wales is very tight, and I tried to pull that word apart. I couldn't quite get to the bottom of it. I think he probably was trying to say soft for the Liberal Party, because that is where the seat losses, such that we've seen them so far, have come from, predominantly around Western Sydney. Now, the campaign spokesman for the coalition throughout the campaign was Matthias Cormann, and of course he's here tonight to continue that line of work. And Senator, this isn't the campaign result that you worked for 8 weeks. There's a kick in the pants here, isn't there?
Well, there's still a lot of counting to be done. The people in the great state of Western Australia have only stopped voting about half an hour ago. So, obviously, let's see what the result is at the end of the night. Sure, I mean, we always expected that there would be some swings. We always said that the election would be close, and that is playing out tonight.
State by state variation seems to be the story so far. How do you account for that? Because just to continue the conversation we were listening to a moment ago with Lee and the panel, surely if Medicare was a big factor, you might expect that to be uniform across the states. How do you account for these variations? Reasonably solid in Queensland, not so in New South Wales or in Tasmania.
Well, Queensland and Victoria are looking quite good for us, and the people in Victoria and in Queensland have experience with very bad Labor governments, and certainly, I mean, that appears to have played a role. But overwhelmingly across Australia, I mean, Labor did run an outrageously dishonest and aggressive scare campaign on Medicare. I mean, to the point where they were sending text messages to people voting, pretending that they came from Medicare Direct, asking for Medicare to be saved. I mean, the extent to which Labor and the unions went in this campaign, seeking to frighten people into believing something that wasn't true, patting themselves on the back, for the political effectiveness of that dishonest scare campaign has been quite unbelievable, quite breathtaking.
At least one member of the ABC broadcast panel has introduced the idea, potentially, of a hung parliament. Is that the way you're seeing it at present?
No, I mean, that's way too early to tell. I mean, obviously, as I said, I mean, people in Western Australia have only stopped voting about half an hour ago. I mean, if you look at what's the situation in Queensland, in Victoria in particular, it's looking good for us. I mean, in New South Wales, I think it's still got a way to go.
And the splintering of old Palmer United Party votes, I suppose people broadly describe it as the angry or the disgruntled, they haven't in large measure gone back to either major party, have they? What's the story that sits behind that, do you think?
I mean, obviously that sort of analysis is, the sort of analysis that will have to be undertaken in the days and weeks to come.
But it doesn't say a lot about the National Economic Plan for Jobs and Growth, that people were inspired by that.
Well, I mean, we presented in this election what we, in our judgment, was important for Australia's future and what was important for our future success, and given the challenges we're facing in the world economy and the like. So, I mean, a lot of people across Australia put their heart and souls into selling our plan, explaining why it was necessary, and obviously, I mean, today was the day for the Australian people to pass judgment. Let's see what it is when all of the votes have been counted.
That is what we do need to work out. You mentioned the great state of Western Australia. Is that critical now in determining this one way or the other?
The great state of Western Australia is always critical. It's a very important state, of course, in the Federation, and I'm very much looking forward to the results coming in out of WA.
All right. Well, Matthias Cormann has some other commitments, and so we'll wrap up from here. Lee.
Here are some shots of the Wentworth Hotel, which is where the Liberal faithful are gathering tonight, in the expectation that at some time in the evening they'll hear from Malcolm Turnbull. Usually the leaders don't speak until there's some sort of result. Who knows when that might be. It's 8... No, please God, no. It's 8:40 p.m.
I'd like to get my flight to Adelaide in the morning. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. It's 8:40 p.m. in the east and 6:40 p.m. in Western Australia. We have about 45% of the vote counted at this stage, and for the time being, there's a 2.9% swing to the Labor Party. We are in no position to call the election at this stage. Michael Rowland's going to give us some more details.
Yes, good evening, Lee. I'm way above you. Here we come at the top of the ABC's election centre, and no one's going anywhere tonight, as you said. Look at how close it is. The Coalition holding 62 seats in the 45th Parliament, Labor on 59, the Greens on 1, and 4 crossbenchers now that Rebecca Sharkey of the Xenophon Party has knocked off Jamie Briggs in the South Australian seat of Mayo. Let's see how the primary vote is holding up now, and the Coalition there sitting on about 42%, the Labor Party on 34.7%, Greens on 10% and others on 13%. It's important to note, though, that the Labor Party really needs to get its primary vote up to about 38-39% if it has any chance of winning government in its own right. But of course, a hung parliament is a very live possibility. Let's see how that primary vote has moved in both directions there. We're seeing the Liberal National Party's primary vote down 3.5%, the Labor vote up 1.4%, Greens up 1.6% and a 0.5% increase to the Independents. Let's see how that is translated on a two-party preferred basis. And here is a swing, as Lee just mentioned, of 2.9% to the Labor Party, and perilously close there on the two-party preferred vote for both the Labor Party and the Coalition. Let's bring up now our virtual map of Australia. Each of these triangles you're about to see represents the 150 seats in the House of Representatives, and with a flick of the fingers we can colour it in, and it's gone from completely white to basically coloured in, certainly on the East Coast and South Australia and the Northern Territory, and that right there is a perfect reflection on just how close this election is. We're starting to see some results in the West. The booths have only just opened, or the counting rather has just finished in the West, but I think we're all in for a very long night. Back to you, Lee.
Thanks very much, Michael. We've got Tanya Plibersek standing by in the seat of Sydney. Tanya, we haven't even talked about your seat tonight on our panel. Can you tell us what's happening there?
Well, the results look pretty good in Sydney, Lee. It looks like I'm ahead on primary votes in every booth that we've counted so far, except for one, which is a result that I'm very proud of. We've had a fantastic campaign here. You can see some of my volunteers behind me. They've been working so hard. They've run a great...
I was going to say they were bursting to cheer. I was thinking you better actually claim victory so they can cheer.
Oh, well, I hope so. And it's, you know, a real tribute to the very strong Labor Party that we've got here in the seat of Sydney, and the great volunteers that I rely on election after election.
More broadly, what's your assessment of what we're seeing going on around the country?
Look, I think it's a pretty good night for us, Lee. Whether it's good enough, we won't know for some time. We've seen very strong results in New South Wales, a number of very strong swings towards us, seats that we will definitely pick up in New South Wales. In Tasmania, it looks like we'll probably pick up more than one seat as well. Victoria looks like it's holding steady. Queensland, I think, will flow towards us. South Australia is very unpredictable, and WA, I think, will be a good state for us as well. And of course, we're hoping to pick up the second seat in the Northern Territory as well.
Stay there for a second, Tanya, because we'll get Anthony Green to actually do the official number crunch on your seat.
Yeah.
I'm not part of the official count, you know. Some people think I am.
You are, as far as we're concerned.
Tanya Plibersek on 44.5, the Liberals, Geoffrey Winters on 29.5, and the Greens well back on third on 17.7. I think devoted most of the resources to Grayndler next door, which the Anthony Albanese has easily held. If we look at the change in vote that's occurring there, the Liberal vote's down, Labor vote up slightly, not a lot of change. And in terms of two-party preferred swing, 1.1% swing to the Labor Party. Tanya Plibersek has no difficulty holding that seat with 44% of the first preference votes, no difficulty.
There you go, you are returned, definitely.
Well, thank you.
Now,
well, that's very good to hear.
What do you think were the decisive seats in your seat? Because people often talk about the fact that these inner city urban seats in Sydney and Melbourne aren't necessarily representative of the issues that people elsewhere in the country are worried about. What do you think were the decisive issues in your seat?
Well, jobs, health, education, climate change, marriage equality. I think they're the issues that voters were talking to me about on polling days, on polling booths today.
I've got Tanya, this is Annabelle Crabb. What do you make looking across...
Hi, Annabelle.
Hello there, Tanya. Congratulations. What do you make looking across the nation more broadly if you've had an opportunity to do that? And what do you make of the substantial move that seems to be happening against the government in Tasmania, obviously in South Australia where there are other factors, but the movement in Victoria is virtually nil? What do you read into that?
Well, I think people in Tasmania feel no better off. They know that wages are stagnant, they're worried about penalty rates, unemployment's higher now than during the global financial crisis. This government that promised so much when it came to economic management has actually tripled the deficit and added $100 billion to net debt, and they've cut services, they've cut health and education, the services that people rely on.
In Queensland, meanwhile, there's nearly a 3% swing against the government, but Labor's only picking up about 1.3% of that, according to our numbers at the moment. Can Labor win if you don't do better in Queensland?
Well, it's very unpredictable, and there's a few seats there like Longman where the margins were larger margins that we think we'll pick up with a very good candidate there in Longman, but it is really too early in the night to tell. I said actually at the beginning of the night that there's a good chance that we'll be still trying to work out who's won this election tomorrow, and maybe even longer than that. It's a very, very close election, and a real tribute, I think, to our campaign that we've managed to come so close. We've had 12,200 volunteers. We've knocked on 500,000 doors. We've made 1 million phone calls. We've got a great campaign team led by our National Secretary, George Wright. We've had Bill just campaigning extraordinarily well. Very disciplined, very strong message. We've had our 100 positive policies out there nice and early so people know what we stand for. We've had great candidates. I think it's a campaign that we can be proud of.
Tanya Plibersek, regardless of whether or not Labor actually were to get over the line tonight, is it safe to say Bill Shorten's done enough to retain the Labor leadership?
Oh, look, I think it's been an absolutely terrific campaign, and the results are so close tonight that we have certainly not given up on Bill Shorten being the Prime Minister. So let's deal with that.
Okay, Tanya Plibersek, thanks very much and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We might take a look at some of the seats that are currently in doubt, Chris.
Yeah, look, let's start in Western Sydney. Lindsay is one of those seats that we always appear to be looking at federal elections. Emma Hussar running a race there against Fiona Scott. She was doing it on one leg. She did her ACL in Anthony.
And I'll just warn, these were all in doubt when we put the list in the computer, so there's actually a few decisions popped up in this list. Lindsay, Fiona Scott there up against Emma Hussar. Fiona Scott's well ahead on first preferences. If we look at the numbers here, 40.7 to 39.9, all under 4% for everybody else. So there's quite a smattering of preferences. At the moment, we've got the Liberal Party ahead. The swing is 2.8%, it's 50.2. That's our projected number at the end of the night. So that seat remains in doubt. The Liberal Party are ahead.
That's been firming for us over the last hour too.
Yeah. So that's interesting to see. We'll watch what happens there. DeBell, now, this is one of these difficult seats. It is a redistributed seat, so we've classified it as a Labor seat tonight, so it pops up as a retain. It was the one that was counted on that side of the pendulum. And Emma McBride is up against Karen McNamara, who's a sitting Liberal MP, but needed a swing to her to hold the seat. She hasn't got a swing to her. The swing is against her, and at this stage it's 4.2% to the Labor Party. And Emma McBride, whose father was a former state MP in the area, it looks likely to be the new Labor member for DeBell.
All right, well, let's head down to Victoria and the seat of Chisholm, which might come as a bit of a surprise to some. There was a retiring member here. Of course, there's always an effect with that.
It's normal mathematics of Labor gaining seats. This is one seat which appears to have gone the other way. This stage, with over half of the votes counted, Julia Banks is well ahead on first preferences, nearly 8% ahead, with a significant vote for the Greens. You've got Family First and Rise Up Australia with about 4% of the vote there. At the moment, we're showing a 2.6% swing to the Liberal Party. At the moment, we're projecting that as a Liberal gain. So that has gone against the trend in the election. And to be honest, Anna Burke had held that seat for a long time. A very difficult seat for I'm trying to remember, is the Skyrail at the southern end of that electorate, which is a big local issue in that part of Melbourne. I can't remember. But certainly the loss of Anna Burke, who was actually well known and well liked, has been a loss for the Labor Party.
All right, let's head on into South Australia and the seat of Hindmarsh. Now, this was one of those ones, if there hadn't been a Xenophon factor, you'd think a head-to-head against the last two people to fight it out in 2013.
Well, Matt Williams up against Steve Georgianis, back for another slugfest. Again, we're seeing about 20% of the vote for Nick Xenophon's candidates in most electorates, only about 15% there. You would expect that in a hotly contested marginal seat. But again, we've got the Labor Party ahead. Well, it's 50.0, so if they're ahead, it's on a rounding error. So that seat definitely remains in doubt at this stage of the evening.
What's your assumption about the Nick Xenophon preferences on
That's
that?
a preference count. It's a preference count we're
Right,
receiving.
okay.
I can't tell you what number of boos. I'll have a look at it, but it's based on an actual preference count. We'll be coming back to Hindmarsh.
All right, let's go now to Boothby, another seat in South Australia, and of course retiring member Andrew Southcott's going back to medicine.
Yes, and Nicole Flint is currently ahead. She's got a big lead on first preferences. We've got a significant vote there for Karen Hockley, the Nick Xenophon team candidate, and Jane Bang, the Green candidate. I hope that's the correct pronunciation. And the Liberal retain we've got is a 3.8% swing to the Labor Party. At this stage, we're predicting that the Liberal Party will hold that, and Nicole Flint would become the new member for Boothby, succeeding Andrew Southcott.
Let's go back to Barry Cassidy now in Melbourne. Barry, at this point of the night, what's your assessment?
I think that we could go away tonight not knowing whether or not there is a hung parliament, because there are so many tight contests, particularly in Queensland. But on my estimation, let's say Chisholm is a gain for the coalition, and of course they pick up Clive Palmer's seat. Even allowing for that, if four or more seats were to fall to the Labor Party in Queensland and WA collectively, then I think you get just into hung parliament territory, and it could be four or more, because you get seats like Petrie, Ford. Labor claims they're in front in Herbert, though Ewan Jones, the sitting member, disputes that. But Petrie, Ford, Herbert, and then of course Longman, Dixon and Dawson are still in play. And then you get to Western Australia. Now Burt, Julie Bishop mentioned Burt, and that's a tough one. And Hasluck is another one that the Labor Party would hope to win. So when you see so many seats in play, then of course I think on balance it's still more likely than not that we'll have a hung parliament.
I just wonder, Barry, if you can explain something for people who've maybe only just tuned in. You look at it, you see there's a 50% of the vote counted. The national swing is 2.9% to the Labor Party. So if you just looked at those figures, you'd think, OK, that's not enough for them to win government. So can you just explain for the layman why we can't actually call the election on those numbers?
Yeah, and it's not enough to win government, and they won't win government. The Labor Party will not win government. The issue here now is whether or not Malcolm Turnbull can govern in a majority or a minority. That's the marker that I think we now should be focusing on. And for that to happen, if the coalition was to lose 15 seats, I mean, let's say they pick up a couple, Chisholm and Clive Palmer's seat, but it looks at this point as if collectively between the Labor Party and Nick Xenophon, and because of those figures, the seats we underestimated in Queensland, then that's in prospect.
Penny Wong, let me ask you to comment on that. Barry Cassidy just said Labor cannot win government. It's a question now of whether the coalition governs in a minority or a majority government. What do you reckon?
Well, I think there's still a few too many seats in play to make that call. But you'd have to say, because I don't think we're making many of the Queensland seats, not calling those at the moment. I think we are seeing reasonably good signs in 6 of the seats. Yep. Ford, Capricornia, Herbert, Petrie, Flynn and Longman. But, you know, we've got Western Australia yet. We've got seats that are too close to call in South Australia and also in New South Wales.
Yeah, and can I inject in this again? We wait till after 9 o'clock when all those pre-poll booths come in, because I think that, you know, it may well be that it follows exactly on piece to everything else that's happened, but you do have to...
wider variation.
Or you get a wider variation.
You did say, Scott, as well, that pre-polls generally benefit you, right?
Yeah, well, particularly in some tight races, and particularly with an incumbent. I mean, they're going to particularly benefit an incumbent. But let's just also pause here. I'm looking up there in the ALP's primary vote. It's at 36. The only result that was worse than that was in 2013, if you go back to 1949. So this is not a strong primary vote for the Labor Party. It is nowhere near.
And we're looking at a Liberal primary vote of 41, which is down 4 points on last time.
Well, look, I'm not disputing that, Chris.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is we've got the Labor Party at their second lowest primary vote since 1949. So, yes, the government has got a swing against it tonight. There's no doubt about that.
Pitch already. It's early in the night to be doing a
Scott Morrison, sorry,
Well,
before you go on. Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Barry is right. There is no way the Labor Party can form a majority government. No way.
Okay, so you accept that the question now for you is, are we going to be governing in majority, or are we going to slip into minority?
Well, right now, I mean, you couldn't say that the government was even at this point has not even lost 10. I mean, on balance, when you look at seats like picking up Chisholm, when you pick up Fairfax, and that cancel out the potential loss of Mayo. I mean, seats like Macquarie, and Gilmore, none of these would I be prepared to concede by a long stretch. And seats like Lindsay and Petrie and Hindmarsh and Ford, we're seeing improvements over the last hour or so. And and with those pre-polls to still come in and the postals. The government remains, I would remain very confident still of being able to form a government in our own right.
Chris, what's your analysis of it?
I am really, really interested to wait until after 9 o'clock before we start getting too deeply into what might or might not happen. And I'm not saying that those votes will go in any other direction, because, not quite usually they would be a reflection of what we're seeing in the wider electorate. So, they may just reinforce what we're already seeing. But I think, as everyone now agrees, we're going to be here for quite some time. So I trust you're all comfy.
Scott Morrison, let me ask you one thing. Is the prospect of getting the ABCC legislation through in a joint sitting of the Parliament now gone on these sorts of numbers that we're looking at?
Well, we also don't know what's happening in the Senate as well. I mean, a joint sitting requires both houses.
Debacle.
That's both houses. So I think tonight, I don't think that's a discussion for tonight. I think tonight the discussion is about who's going to be able to form a government. Labor won't be able to form a majority government based on those primary numbers. The government is still very much, I think, in a position to form a majority government, and particularly, I think, as the night wears on and the days roll on and further votes are counted, I think you see in these close contests that we will get across the line where we need to.
Just back to a non-hypothetical briefly, our figures are showing something like an 8.7% swing against the Innovation Minister, Wyatt Roy, in his Queensland seat of Longman. Are you prepared to give that one away?
Gosh, no.
Oh, okay. That's
Goodness, no.
That's optimistic.
Not at all.
Can I say in that seat, though, again, One Nation vote on 9% thereabouts, and 17%
Chris, sorry to
Blair.
interrupt you. Tony Abbott is speaking in his electorate of Warringah, so we're going to take that straight away to have a look at.
Sydney has lacked for so long, and that will happen because, notwithstanding a difficult night, there will still be, I believe, a good, strong coalition government in Canberra that can work with a great coalition government here in Macquarie Street to give this area what it needs to prosper and to go ahead. Now, Mike, I've been thinking back, and the last time that we had a coalition government in Canberra and a coalition government in Macquarie Street, except for the last couple of years, was back in the 1970s. And frankly, it is about that long since we've had any decent infrastructure built in this part of Sydney. But I was so pleased to see that, having got the new Northern Beaches Hospital up and running, and you've all seen the construction work there, having got the North Connect up and running, and it's great to see the construction work there in the state budget. Just a few weeks ago, we saw $17 million, serious money to make a serious start on the tunnel underneath Mosman. It needs to happen, and it will happen, because there are coalition governments in Sydney and coalition governments in Canberra. Can I finally say, every single Liberal member of Parliament owes an extraordinary debt to thousands and thousands of others. We owe an extraordinary debt to our family. Thank you, Margie, for everything you've done. And I think my mum's down the back there. Where are you, Mum? Mum's down the back there, very close to the bar, I believe. That's a well-known Abbott trait. We owe an extraordinary debt to our party friends and colleagues. And you know, I couldn't ask for a better friend and colleague than Mike Baird, an absolute gem of a man who is doing a fabulous job leading our state. But I want to pay tribute tonight to Walter Villatora, the conference president, who hasn't just led this conference but has led the fight inside the New South Wales Liberal Party for democracy. And wouldn't it be nice to see a bit of democracy inside our party? If Mike Baird wants it, if Malcolm Turnbull wants it, if John Howard wants it, if Barry O'Farrell wants it, and if Tony Abbott wants it,
We're going to leave Tony Abbott there. He's speaking to the faithful that are gathered in Warringah, thanking his family and acknowledging the Premier Mike Baird, who we didn't see but who's obviously at that gathering. I can tell you as well that Jamie Briggs, the member for Mayo, has just tweeted his concession in that seat. After a tough fight tonight, it hasn't been our night. Thanks to those who supported me, and my best to the new member. It is a great electorate. Lost that one, Scott.
Well, that's very disappointing, and Jamie came into the Parliament in a by-election for Alexander Downer, as we all know, not long after I was elected, and so I feel very, very strongly for him in his day and the whole family, and I wish him well. I mean, Jamie's a guy with a lot of talent, a lot of ability, and I doubt that that's the last we've seen of Jamie Briggs in politics. I would hope, and I wish him in his day and everyone all the best.
We will cross shortly to the Xenophon team member, Rebecca Sharkey, who is the victor in that seat. I think what we might do now, though, is have a look at the seat of Brisbane, which is one of the key marginals that we're watching in this race. The LNP candidate, Trevor Evans, is standing by, and we're going to go and talk to him with his keen supporters in the background. But Chris, just take us through the seat first.
Yeah, this is one that they were worried about, and that's the Liberal National Party, because, of course, there's a retiring member in the seat of Brisbane. The margin was already close, Anthony, but it's one of those seats that the margin hasn't shifted that much.
Yeah, 56% of the vote counted. It's important to do is look here at the vote. This is an inner-city electorate, and you're seeing a big vote there for the Greens. Labor's only on just under 27, the Greens just over 20%, and the LNP vote is on 48.3. So that's translating into a 0.8 swing to the LNP, so a small increase in their vote. And so on those numbers, Trevor Evans has been easily elected as the new member for Brisbane, succeeding Theresa Gambaro.
And in a magical coincidence, he happens to be standing by in that inner-city Brisbane seat. So, Trevor Evans, congratulations. It looks like you've been returned as the member for Brisbane.
Thank you very much. It's a huge honour. It's very humbling.
So you, of course, had a seat where your predecessor was retiring, the long-serving, if peripatetically serving, Theresa Gambaro. Yet you've managed to achieve a swing, by the looks of it, to the LNP in that seat. Can you talk us through the complications of succeeding a retiring member and tell us what the issues were in this particular campaign for you?
Yeah, well, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Theresa Gambaro, the retiring member. She helped me a lot with my campaign. She obviously did retire relatively late in the term, so it was a short and sharp campaign for me, but she was fantastic. She supported me all the way. I got into a lot of community groups with her, and it was just so good to have her support and her endorsement, and obviously the people of Brisbane have accepted the change, and that's a fantastic thing, and I look forward to serving them for the next 3 years.
So, Trevor Evans, you come to us tonight from Brisbane having had a happy result in your seat, but your Your colleagues are having mixed results all over the state. Very typically, I'm afraid, for your state, we seem to be getting all sorts of exciting results that are all over the place. Your colleague Wyatt Roy in the seat of Longman seems to be in dreadful trouble. Ewan Jones struggling too in Herbert. There's a big vote for third parties in Queensland. What did you pick up in your seat, and what's your analysis of the rest of the state of Queensland?
Yeah, look, I've got to say I've been very focused on the news here in Brisbane tonight. I haven't spent too much time looking around the rest of the state or the nation. I can report that the people of Brisbane responded really well to the Prime Minister and the idea of having a plan for the future, as opposed to some of the scare campaigns that were put out in recent weeks. What I would say is that I have seen a little bit in previous campaigns in seats like Longman and Dickson, and I do know that they run very strong postal campaigns out there, so I've got full faith that in late counting, people like Peter Dutton and Wyatt Roy are likely to come home.
Right, okay. On another note, Trevor, this is a bit of a first, this seat for Queensland, in that this campaign in your seat was fought by two gay candidates from their major parties. Is that a bit of a watershed for you?
Oh, look, I think it's of some historical note, but I have to be honest and say I don't think it was a huge issue in the campaign. When I was out on the streets, when I was door knocking, when I was in community groups meeting all of the fantastic people of Brisbane, it wasn't something that came up. People were much more interested in management of the national economy, in jobs, and in all of the true national priorities that were discussed in the national campaign.
Righto, Trevor. Well, thanks for your attention and commentary this evening. I'll leave you to celebrate with your very happy supporters while we watch goggle-eyed at what the rest of the night brings us from Queensland. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We've been spending quite a bit of time on Queensland, and we will continue to do so, which suits me very well since I'm a Queenslander.
Beautiful
Chris.
one day, crackers the next.
Well, we're going to sweep up the coast of Queensland, starting just north of Brisbane and the seat of Petrie. Now, this is a bellwether won by 14. The party takes government 14 to 15 times since 1975.
And at this moment, Luke Howarth, he's leading on first preferences. And with the preferential voting system, that doesn't always guarantee victory, of course, because you've got the Green vote there, or the significant family first vote there in that electorate as well. On those numbers, we've got the LNP just ahead. The swing's 0.3, but rounding there, the LNP is just ahead. So we're not giving that seat away at this stage. That's a fair bit of counting to go in that contest. We'll be hearing a lot more about Petrie. It's interesting that some of the marginal seats, there isn't a big swing.
No, there's not.
And others there are.
Yeah.
And actually, just interesting, One Nation wasn't in that seat, neither was Katter's Australia Party. It might depend on the composition of the third party that's testing these seats.
All right, let's go to Ford. And in 2013, of course, famously, Bert Van Manen managed to beat a former premier in that seat. How's he hanging on this time around?
Yes, that was the BT Ford Clinic, if I remember at the time.
Still a good joke.
As he's known among colleagues.
Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Annabelle. Bert Van Manen on 39.3, Des Hardman 39.1. There is quite a vote there for third parties, and so we rely on the preference count on this one. We've got a 4.7% swing, and that seat has just got the Labor Party ahead, so that seat remains in doubt.
All right, let's go to the Immigration Minister's seat of Dickson. There are big campaigns against him by groups like Get Up here. How has that been faring?
Well, let's look at the first preferences initially, 25,275, or the percentage vote there is, just trying to look at my computer, 43.6. Well ahead on first preferences of Linda Lavache, former State Attorney General. We've got the LNP retained. The swing is 5.4, so it's a significant swing. But at this stage, we've got the LNP retaining that seat. I can tell you we have preference counts in 28 of the 34 booths we're receiving tonight. And what's outstanding is a collection of divisional returning officers and blind low vision. So it looks, Albany Creek South, which is a very solid Liberal booth. So that's why we're giving away that seat at this stage.
And to Townsville in the seat of Herbert. And of course, here Ewan Jones is defending the seat. Longman, sorry, gone to Longman first. We're going to go to Wyatt Roy's seat.
Next door, Wyatt Roy's seat. Now this one's bounced backwards and forwards with the count tonight. Wyatt Roy is ahead on first preferences. But again, his problem is his first preference vote is under 40%. We've got it as a Labor Party gain. I haven't looked at the numbers in great precision in that electorate. I'll just try and have a look at my laptop and see if it'll tell me anything exciting. At this stage, we're saying we've got Susan Lamb as the new member. I would want to see me think. We've got 30 of 41 two-candidate preferred polling booths. Again, 1%, I'd wait. That's
Yeah.
a first preference vote there, 71.6. That's quite a high count, actually.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
and
see what's
a
missing.
9% vote there for One Nation.
Yes.
Speaking of One Nation, Pauline Hanson on Channel 9 has said that on current figures she thinks One Nation will be looking for 2 Senate seats in Queensland.
It's not beyond the realms of possibility at all.
Current Senate figures are about 2%.
Right. She's being a little optimistic early. Now, I mentioned before that Jamie Briggs had... Oh, sorry, we're going to go to Herbert first before we move on?
I think we've moved on.
We have to look at
move
Herbert.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
So, seat of Herbert, which of course Ewan Jones was contesting.
This again has been bouncing around. This has been one of the largest swings. Now, Ewan Jones, his first preference vote, is difficult. There's a lot of votes there for other parties. 33.4. He's only got a third of the vote. The Labor Party's under a third as well. 13%, 14% for One Nation, 6 and a bit with the Kaz Australian Party. We've got that as a Labor gain on 50.9. There's a lot more counting to come. What will be interesting to that, you would expect that those smaller parties are not always very good at pre-poll voting. There's some very interesting figures to look on that number yet to come. So at the moment we've just given Herbert, and I think it was Longman away. I think we might be coming back to them at some stage during the night, but they're not good for the Liberal Party at this stage.
No,
Okay.
but I don't think any of those, with so much still to count, can be in any way put in the Labor's column.
Now,
No, but
you would have...
you know, I'd rather be where we are than where we might otherwise be. So well done to the Queenslanders. It's been a great campaign.
Now, you would have heard me before say that Jamie Briggs, the Liberal member for Mayo, has conceded the seat. So we have standing by there the victor, who is a Xenophon candidate, Rebecca Sharkey. She's standing by with Nick Xenophon, looking very happy. Before we go to them, let's just get Chris and Anthony to run us through what's actually happened there and give us the breakdown.
So Anthony's seat in the Adelaide Hills, and this was always expected to be, if one was to fall in South Australia to the Xenophon team, it would be this one.
That's right, and this is a seat that has twice before where the Labor Party has been passed and caused problems. It happened twice to Alexander Downer while he was member, and the Liberal votes got much lower than it ever was for Alexander Downer. It's only 37.2. The Nick Xenophon team on 35. The Labor and Green preferences. This is an actual preference count, 56.2%, with over 50%. As you already mentioned, that Jamie Briggs has conceded defeat, and Rebecca Sharkey is the new member for Mayo.
Well, it's a significant story, and Mayo has been threatening over the years at times to fall to independent candidates, and tonight it seems finally to have happened. So Nick Xenophon and Rebecca Sharkey are standing by in the NXT lair there in South Australia. Congratulations, Rebecca Sharkey, you are the new member for Mayo.
Thank you very much.
Did you expect to see a result this early in the evening and so decisively?
Oh, look, certainly not. I owe immense gratitude to the people of Mayo for taking a chance on me for the first time in really, I think, the start of Federation. The seat is not held by a Conservative party.
So there's obviously a massive movement that's Nick Xenophon related going on in South Australia, and Nick, I'll ask you about that in a moment, but this is a seat also that's got a local member that's been in strife in the last year, a local member for whom, of course, you used to work. What percentage of the result, or what role did that particular personality issue and professional issue of Jamie Briggs play, do you think?
People were not talking to me about that. When I was knocking on doors, which I was doing every weekend, or holding sausage sizzles, people were talking about health. They were talking about our youth unemployment, which is higher than the Playford region. They were talking about the lack of road infrastructure, and really just that they didn't feel that they counted or well represented.
Nick Xenophon, it looks at this stage on our figures that you're experiencing something like a 22% swing. There's a 10% swing against the Coalition in South Australia and nearly a 5% swing against the ALP. Here's your free shot. What message does this send to the major parties in South Australia?
I'll do a free shot, not a cheap shot. Look, I just think people feel neglected. There is a void for them from the political centre where it's neither about the ideologies of left or right. People are sick of this toxic politics where the major parties throw mud at each other, where they don't sit down and solve the nation's problems. And what Rebecca did in Mayo was terrific. She engaged with the community and really made a really big difference. And the fact that the result has been as decisive as it is terrific. But, you know, you ain't seen nothing yet, because Rebecca's going to work that seat so hard. She'll be connecting with the community now on a full-time basis as a local member, and my prediction is that she'll be around for a very long time with the will of the electorate.
Well, Rebecca will be one seat member in the House of Representatives. You may have 2, 3, 4 Nick Xenophon senators upstairs. Given the vast expression of confidence in you that the state of South Australia seems to be about to express, how can you possibly, from that position, change anything for the state of South Australia?
Annabelle, there are so many things that can be changed. Firstly, there are issues to do with Arium. That's on the first priority. The steelworks in Whyalla, they're in crisis. We need certainty for our steel industry. It's not a South Australian issue, it's a national issue for the future of manufacturing. There are issues to do with tens of thousands of jobs that are at risk when Holden closes down as a car maker in this state, but also it impacts on Victoria and the rest of the country as well. So there are issues there with the Automotive Transformation Scheme, getting adequate funds for companies and, to transition to other forms of manufacturing and to other sectors of the economy. The government has failed on that. So there are many, many things that need to be done, that can be done, and, you know, people know me. They know that I'll be pesky and persistent, but I will sit down and be pragmatic and negotiate with the government of the day, which I expect will be Malcolm Turnbull at this stage.
Nick Xenophon, you say that they're all national issues. In fact, all the money is flowing into South Australia. If you hold quite a few seats for South Australia, are you just going to be the member for South Australia, and will the rest of the nation just have to keep pumping money into it?
No, it's not a question of pumping money. It's a question of getting good outcomes. It's not a good outcome to see the city of Whyalla fall over, because it will become Australia's biggest ghost town, according to evidence of a Senate inquiry that I was a part of recently. You need to make sure that we have a pragmatic, sensible approach to manufacturing in this country, that it doesn't fall over because of the jobs that are at stake, and that's an issue that resonated very strongly. But it's not just a South Australian issue, it is a national issue, that we actually take care of our manufacturing sector and our regional sectors in terms of horticulture, farming and value adding. They might, you know, these are the issues that resonated when we were talking to members of the community, and interestingly, throughout South Australia, big issues in terms of substance abuse and a lack of support for people, particularly with an ice addiction. And these are the issues that the major parties haven't been talking about at this election.
Nick Xenophon, 2 questions. One, a second ago you said that you expected to be working with a Turnbull government. If there was a hung parliament, is that what you would prefer?
No, I'm just going on the weight of numbers. It's not a question of preference. It's a question of sitting down and sitting down with either side, if it is a hung parliament. But I think it's too early to say. I mean, I've already promised bottles of Grange to a lot of journalists if there's going to be a hung parliament, so I'm going to be in a lot of trouble if there will be.
Wow, it could be an expensive night. Thanks for your time, Nick Xenophon, and Rebecca Sharkey. Our congratulations. You're the new member for Mayo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well done.
You are with the ABC's election coverage. We're having a look here at the Labor headquarters tonight, the Labor Party, which is at the Moonee Racecourse, I think. Everyone's eagerly, no doubt, waiting to see what's going to happen. It's just gone 9:15 in the east. It's 2 hours behind in the west. 55% of the vote has been counted, and there is a 2.9% swing on to the Labor Party. But we are not calling the election. We don't know when we'll be calling it. We seem to be thinking we're going to be quite a way away from that. So make yourself another cup of tea, crack open another pack of Tim Tams, and just relax to the dulcet tones of Michael Rowland.
Yes, those Tim Tams sound fantastically. Thank you very much. Thank you for the cookie, by the way, as well, Annabelle. It's keeping me wide awake here. Let's bring you the map of Australia. And over the course of the night, like a child with a colouring book, this map full of 150 triangles has been slowly filled in. Let's show you the current state of play, and that map truly reflects how close this election is, with an almost equal number of blue and red seats there. On our count, only 9 triangles, 9 seats still to be coloured in. A lot of interest tonight in the state of New South Wales. It is a state the Labor Party has done particularly well in. We'll break out the seat numbers for you there, and there you see the Coalition on 22 seats, the Labor Party on 23 seats. The Labor Party doing particularly well based on its 2013 performance, and the Greens and Independents Independents yet to pick up a seat there. A lot of interest in a number of seats in New South Wales. Let's look at a few of them, starting with the seat of Macarthur. It went fairly early in the night. It was held by the Liberal Party's Russell Matheson, the Labor Party's Mike Freelander. As I move this way, away from Russell Matheson, an easy gain to the ALP, a fairly large swing there with 69% of the vote counted. Let's take you down to the seat of Macquarie, or up to the seat of Macquarie around the Blue Mountains area of New South Wales. Louise Marcus has held that seat since 2010. The ABC predicts that there's a gain to the Labor candidate Susan Templeman, a former radio journalist. Susan Templeman has got a 6.2% swing. So that's Macarthur and Macquarie. We can now take you to the seat of Banks, also in the southern suburbs of Sydney. One to watch very closely over the course of this campaign. David Coleman has held that seat since 2013, and the ABC predicts that despite a very close contest, a really great attempt by the Labor Party there to take that seat off David Coleman in the form of Chris Gambian, there is despite a swing of 2.2% to the Labor Party, David Coleman, based on our predictions, based on Anthony Green's always trustworthy computer, David Coleman should hold that seat for the Liberal Party. And let's finish this wrap of New South Wales seats with a look at the seat of Barton. Formerly a Liberal Party seat, but under the big redistribution it became a notional Labor Party seat. And there we see Linda Burney, who was a former Deputy Labour leader in New South Wales in the State Parliament, easily winning that seat off Nick Vivavas with a 3.9% swing. OK, let's cross this disco floor once again tonight and bring you the House of Representatives chamber as it looks at the moment, with the smiling visages there of Bill Shorten and the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. And this is how close it is. The sea of red there, the 72 to the Coalition and 65 to the ALP, 1 to the Greens in the form of Adam Bant, and 4 independents. And where those undeclared seats or undecided seats go tonight, Lee, is going to tell us whether Malcolm Turnbull governs in his own right or whether the 45th Parliament of Australia will be hung.
I wish we knew. You keep calling it a disco floor. You haven't busted out a move yet, Rolly. We will hold you to that. Scott is going to give us an update on a couple of things.
Well, particularly Herbert. I mean, in Herbert there were over 11,000 postals, and there were some almost 24,000 pre-poll votes. In Longman there were some 40,000 early votes, and there were 6,000 postals. Now, on our side, we processed about 6,000 of those. Labor and the Greens processed 22, not 22,000, just 22. And when you've got a lot of pre-poll votes coming in, as we've talked about a lot in this election, and in those very tight races where we're talking about Longman, Petrie and a lot of these other places, we're pretty confident we're going to do well in those pre-poll votes and postals, which when you're getting down you're a week into the count, and you need to hold a 100-vote lead or build it out to 500 and things like that. That's where these seats are going to switch. So that's why in seats even like Macquarie, I wouldn't be prepared to concede as yet, but certainly seats like Herbert and Longman, Petrie, Ford, all of these seats, I think, and look, I haven't looked at lines for a while, but I'm mindful of what Eric said earlier in the night. But all of those seats will be benefited by what has been, I think, a good, strong campaign from us on the pre-poll and the postal.
Just so that people understand, when you say you process postal votes, that means that when you send out the ballot paper to someone, they get the Liberal Party how to vote card.
That's right, and they're people who are responding to the Liberal Party because they want to vote for the Liberal Party. And an incumbent, and all of these seats we're talking about, whether it's Longman or Petrie or Ford or any of these places, or Herbert, that is where that is being done by the incumbent member. Now, in a tight race where it comes down to hundreds of votes, then that is what makes the difference between whether you win or lose a seat. And so there are still a lot of seats Labor need to make up. I mean, we've picked up Chisholm, and while we sadly have lost Mayo, we'll pick up Fairfax. And so, the number of seats that Labor, could be reasonably confident about at the moment, I would have thought was about 8. But then we've picked up Chisholm, which means it's 7, and that means there's still 8 seats that need to be picked up.
I reckon Mr Green could probably shed a little bit of light on some of this stuff.
Well, actually, I'm prepared to make a prediction. We won't know who's won tonight. At this stage, the projected model we're doing has the government on 75 seats, which isn't a majority. I mean, they may get a majority, they may not get a majority. At the moment, on the numbers I'm seeing, it's not clear. I don't think we'll have a clearer picture by the end of tonight.
So that is you calling the election?
No, I'm not calling the election.
You're calling.
I'm saying we won't know the results tonight.
That is your call for this evening. We're not going to know today.
He's calling it an aubergine.
Yeah. Just so everyone's clear, you go to 70. You go from 75 to 76.
The government's got a bare majority. But I've just got to say on that is that the Labor Party doesn't get beyond 70 either. So if Labor's going to try and govern, it's going to have all those crossbenchers on the side. So Bob Katter's on the crossbench, what would he do? So there's a number of things like that. So I don't think we'll know the results.
Can you take us through some of those changing and doubtful
Certainly
seats, please?
The changing votes, I wanted changing seats. What we've given away Bass and Braddon in Tasmania at the moment, we've got Burt as a Labor gain, which is why suddenly the coalition doesn't necessarily have a majority. I haven't looked at those figures and we're looking at Burt in a couple of moments. Chisholm is a Liberal gain, Eden Monero is a Labor gain, as is Herbert, although Scott made some remarks about that, and with regards to Longman as well. Lyons looks like I think it's pretty definitely gone, as is MacArthur and Macquarie. Nick Xenophon's team has gained Mayo, the Nationals have gained Murray, and Solomon is another Labor gain at this stage.
Murray's quite a gain for the Nationals, by the way, because the Labor Party was preferencing the Liberal Party there.
The Labor Party preference is always split 50-50 in the seat. Like, they don't hand out many harder votes, so that's not surprising. We've got a couple of seats in doubt at this stage. We've got Labor ahead in Capricornia, the Liberals ahead in Cowan. They're very early figures at this stage. Ford, the Labor Party's ahead. They're ahead in Hindmarsh, they're ahead in Lindsay at the moment, haven't looked at it recently. They're ahead in Perth, which they hold, and the LNP is ahead in Petrie, which they hold. So that's the current picture. That will solidify through the evening, but I think there's enough doubt. There will be enough of these in doubt at the end of the night that I don't think we'll have a clear majority either way.
Alana McTiernan retiring in Perth has had an effect on that seat.
I'd have to look at the exact numbers, that might be early figures. We've got the first of the figures from Western Australia actually coming up.
Yeah, let's go through those. So the seat of Burt, which is the new one, and at this stage the Labor Party is very underdone in Western Australia, Anthony, because they hold 3 of 15.
I'm sorry, that was supposed to be on the touch screen. I was my fault, sorry.
Nope.
The seat of Burt, we've got 23% of the vote counted. Matt Keogh is well ahead on first preferences. A significant vote there for the Greens and the Australian Christians. It's predicting the swing we're seeing there is 11.2%. It must be said that seat looked like a Labor seat when it was drawn. It really did. It was in an area Labor hadn't bothered campaigning with at the 2 previous elections, and once drawn, it's a bit like the redrawing of MacArthur. You redraw the boundaries in an area like that and you suddenly rediscover it's like putting water on peat moss. Suddenly these voters come back.
That's true, true. But you still got to actually campaign and win the seat, and this is in a state where Labor historically hasn't done as well as we need to, and that is a really good result for Matt and his campaign and for the WA branch. I think a very, very big swing.
All right, the seat of Hasluck in Metropolitan Perth, it's of course held by Ken Wyatt.
I haven't had a look at these figures. Significant though there for the Greens. This stage, some vote for the 2 Christian parties there. If I look at
that's a strong result for Ken.
It is.
It is. The 2-party preferred swing there is only 1.7. So these on this stage, I don't know exactly which polling places that's from.
Yeah, Ken's coming back.
It looks like it's coming back.
All right. Canning, Andrew Hastie's seat. Of course, it was famous Canning by-election, which was just after we had a change of government.
This was made safer.
This
was made safer for the Liberal Party by the redistribution, and certainly on those numbers, he's clearly a very strong candidate as well, and should have little difficulty holding that seat. There's been a 6.3% swing, but again, that includes a fair bit of Don Randall's former vote in the old seat. So that looks like sort of a swing towards where it was at the by-election, but is more a correction to what would be normal figures in Western Australia.
All right, let's move on to the seat of Perth, and of course we had a retiring member here and a very, very popular one.
Jeremy Quinn on 41.2.
That is
17% counted. Tim Hammond 37.7. Green 17.9. 2-party preferred swing is 0.3. We've got the Labor Party ahead. We've got a fair bit of counting to come in that one, but I think that's leaning towards being Labor held. I haven't looked at the precise figures on that one.
And we'll end this little run with the seat of Cowan.
Well, on these raw numbers, and Cowan is a very diverse electorate. It's got some very solid Labor voting, Housing Commission estates. It's got some much newer, rapidly growing estates. A very, very diverse electorate, and it's sort of all the bits left over from the other elections on the northern side of Perth. The two-party preferred swing, when we factor it in, is only 2.9%. So those are clearly figures from strong Labor voting areas of the electorate. When you factor in where they're from, the swing is much smaller and the Liberal Party are
But if you're
retaining
looking
their
to
lead.
form government out of Western Australia on those figures, you're not going to be getting it if you're the Labor Party tonight.
No, they're not going to
right.
get enough seats here.
Yeah.
We're going to take a look at the seat of Barton, which is a key seat in this election. It was affected by a redistribution. Linda Burney, who was the Labor candidate, is standing by and she's going to talk to us in a minute. She has become the first Indigenous woman elected to the House of Representatives. Chris, can you tell us a bit more about this seat?
Yeah, and of course this was the big mover in the redistribution that we saw of the seats in New South Wales, which pushed 3 Liberal Party seats into the Labor Party column, Anthony.
Yes, and so this was turned from a very marginal Liberal seats, a shift of about 5% along the pendulum. Linda Burney leads well ahead there on first preferences, 49.1 with 62% of votes. She can't be defeated from there with Green votes and the like. So that's a Labor Party. We're classing it as a retain because of the redistribution makes it look like a Labor seat, and we're saying that she will win that with 58% of the two-party preferred vote. Nick Varvaris, the former member, has been